and welcome to WION World is One. I'm Redi Francis coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and this is the West Asia Post, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates from the world's most volatile region. The Pandora Papers have exposed the wealth and dealings of world leaders. On the list were some of West Asia's leaders, but the most prominent one is the King of Jordan. At a time when discontent in the Hashemite kingdom is on the rise, secret documents revealed that the king has a $100 million property empire abroad. King Abdullah bought luxury homes across the world, even as foreign aid continued to pour into Jordan. We tell you more.
A coup, rising discontent among tribes, winds of change in West Asia, and a reconciliation with its neighbor. The Jordan king had its plate full this year, but the Pandora Papers has put the monarch back into news. In focus is a hidden secret property empire. The papers reveal homes across the world. Abdullah purchased lavish properties on both US coasts. The origins of the funds used, however, remain unclear. Nearly $70 million was spent on 3 adjacent homes. The purchases were made between 2014 and 2017. All of them were made by companies associated with the king, forming one of the largest complexes in Malibu's celebrity enclave. But not just the United States, there were purchases in the United Kingdom too. At least 3 multi-million-dollar residences in London, 2 residences in the Kensington area, and a country home near Windsor Castle. The total bill, a whopping $106 million. King Abdullah's spendings are not outlandish when you compare it to other monarchs in the region. But unlike Gulf nations, Jordan is one of the poorest countries here. It has no significant oil or gas reserves to make money. Instead, what it survives on is its political clout. Foreign aid pours into Jordan every year. A small price for the stability it maintains here and for accepting all refugees with open arms. The Jordanian king says he has nothing to hide. The palace say the properties were not a secret, but were not disclosed for reasons of privacy and security. Jordan's foreign minister also pushed back against claims, saying there was nothing secretive about the transactions.
There's a huge difference between protecting the privacy of His Majesty, which is something that is necessary due to the position he holds, and between being secret. That is number one. So I would say that those properties have been used by His Majesty. There's nothing secret about them. They were purchased through legal manners. No law was broken. Nothing wrong was done in purchasing them. And these are the facts that must govern the perception of this issue and the narrative and the discourse of this issue.
There is nothing wrong about owning properties via offshore companies in parts of the world. But the Pandora Papers reveal the unusual extent to which the financial team went to protect Abdullah's secrets. The reason could be the widespread discontent in the Hashemite kingdom. The main person behind this is the king's half-brother, Hamza bin Hussein, a popular figure in Jordan and a spitting image of his father, the late King Hussein. Hamza was the king's favorite, but he was too young to take over the throne. So when Hussein died a premature death in 1999, Abdullah II became king and Hamza was named the crown prince. This was the late king's dying wish, but it all changed in 2004. King Abdullah stripped his brother of his title. He wanted his son to succeed him. Thus emerged a rift in the Hashemite kingdom. The social tensions laid bare by the palace drama can be seen almost everywhere in the kingdom. Economic crisis frayed the historic patronage for loyalty bond, a sacred bond between Jordan's king and its tribes, a bedrock of the Hashemite family's decades-long rule. This may have been an underlying factor in an alleged plot to take over the kingdom. The prince has since been silenced, his purported co-conspirators arrested, but insiders fear that anger is simmering, and that anger could erupt at any moment, a warning bound to worry the kingdom's Western allies. For years, King Abdullah has had a well-curated public image. In 2018, the country broke out in protests after King Abdullah moved to raise taxes. Since then, public anger has never abated. Resentment has been growing over the years. People are blaming government mismanagement. While Jordan may have silenced protests in the past, with the new leaks, will the monarchy survive another descent? West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Lebanon is going through one of the world's worst economic meltdowns in the last 150 years. And as Lebanese citizens got poorer by the day, Lebanese politicians and businessmen got richer. Lebanese leaders stashed wealth abroad in offshore tax havens, with Prime Minister Najib Mikati and others named in the Pandora leaks. We tell you more.
Crushed under a mountain of debt, decades of corruption and scandals, and a financial meltdown like no other, Lebanon is facing its worst crisis since the civil war, and there seems to be no end in sight. But as citizens get poorer by the day, its politicians are stashing their wealth abroad. The Pandora Papers revealed the extent of this secret wealth. Lebanon's politicians and bankers stowed wealth in offshore tax havens. This money was then used to buy expensive properties. All this while Lebanon is going through its worst economic crisis. The names revealed are part of the ruling elite, the same ruling class that has been called out for corruption. Many prominent leaders were named. This includes Prime Minister Najib Mikati, Mikati's predecessor Hassan Diab, Central Bank Governor Riyad Salameh, Chairman of Al Mawarid Bank Marwan Keradine, and businessman and former MP Nimat Frem. Mikati is often considered to be Lebanon's richest man, one of the wealthiest in West Asia, with a net worth of $2.7 billion. Mikati first entered Lebanese politics in 1998. He has since been appointed as a prime minister thrice. The papers reveal that Mikati owns a Panama-based offshore company. He used it to buy a property worth $10 million in Monaco. The Prime Minister has since denied any wrongdoing. He added that his family wealth was legal. It came from a communication business they owned for decades. He also said that owning property through firms was a common commercial practice. Another key figure named is the central bank governor. Riyad Salameh has been heading the central bank since 1993. But the Pandora Papers show a list of offshore companies that he and his family own in several tax havens. Unlike Mikati, Salameh is at the center of many investigations. In July, French prosecutors opened an investigation against him. This was for allegations of money laundering. The longtime central bank chief has since dismissed them, calling the charges a politically motivated campaign. The reveal comes as Lebanon is going through its worst crisis. It is a stark revelation for thousands of citizens who are struggling to buy basic goods in the country. In practice, establishing offshore companies is not illegal, but it is often a common tool for tax evasion. The system allows the rich to follow financial regulations of another country even without living there. The offshore system can drain trillions from treasuries, worsen the gap between the rich and the poor, and protect those who are in power. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Like always, we will continue to bring you all the latest updates from the heart of the conflict. Don't go anywhere, we have a lot more lined up for today. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what else is making the headlines across West Asia.
Iranian foreign minister met with top Lebanese officials, saying that Tehran is willing to rebuild Beirut port and construct 2 new power plants in Lebanon. Tehran says talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia have gone a good distance. This comes as the 2 West Asian nations try to improve ties after years of Cold War. UAE, a major carbon emitter, aims to go net zero by 2050. The Gulf nation has one of the world's highest emissions rates per capita, ahead of nations like Australia and the United States. At least 11 people were killed after tropical cyclone Shaheen battered parts of Oman. There was widespread flooding along the northern coast as the storm made landfall. Bahrain, Russia, and other members of the UN Human Rights Council pushed through a vote to shut down the body's war crimes investigations in Yemen, a defeat for the West, who wanted to keep the mission going. Qatar wraps up its first Legislative Council elections, with none of the 26 female candidates winning at the polls. The first legislative elections were held for 2/3 of the Advisory Shura Council.
The early elections in Iraq were a key demand to the anti-government protests that rocked the country in 2019. But as the country goes to polls, the big question remains, will there be a change in the old guard? As a record number of independent candidates take part in polls, political blocs lurk behind the shadows. So the question is, who will lead Baghdad? And what will it mean for Iraq's future?
Independent candidate Omar Al-Hamdani is confident as he speaks in front of a large audience ahead of the polls. He thinks traditional blocs will have to concede more seats, a response to the anti-government protests in 2019. War-scarred Iraq is heading for polls. They are being held early in response to mass protests against the government in 2019, but there is little evidence that suggests anything will change. The focus is, however, on independent candidates. The elections are being held under a law, one that is meant to help independent candidates. The law allows voters to elect individual lawmakers. Earlier, they had to choose from party lists. Each member of the parliament can now represent a specific electoral district.
The previous political parties and factions did not provide any services to citizens. Candidates would be under the control of parties and did not have the power to take decisions. It would lie with the head of the faction or the party that did not manage to provide services to citizens over the last 18 years.
3,249 candidates are competing the elections. 789 of them are independent. Out of them, 156 are women. This wasn't always the case in Iraq. More women are running because there is a new gender quota. 25% of seats in the cabinet are reserved for women.
At the beginning, I entered through the women's quota, and the quota was a form of affirmative action, and it protects the presence of women in the House of Representatives. At this time, we were suffering from sectarianism. Being a moderate woman was very difficult. The sect would constitute protection for those who seek its protection, and some would use it as an identity. I didn't use it. My identity was feminist. That was my identity.
In theory, the changes should empower independent voices, but the shadow of traditional blocs loom over them. Questions have been raised about many non-aligned candidates, raising questions about the impact of the reform. For many, it is simply an electoral maneuver. Shiite majority groups are expected to remain in power. This has been the case in the war-torn nation since Saddam Hussein's Sunni-led regime was removed from power. But the Shiites are also sharply divided. The reason is Iran's growing influence. The favorite this time is the Sadrist movement. Sadr has long been a crucial player in Iraqi politics. He has millions of devoted followers among Iraq's Shiites. Also powerful is the pro-Iran Shiite camp around Hashed al-Shabi. It held the second biggest bloc, the Fatah Alliance. Activists who took to the streets during the protests are also split. While some are boycotting the election, others are taking part. In Iraq, alliances tend to form up and break after each election. Sometimes entire blocs can change sides. The vote count and division of seats matter, but at the end, it is the horse trading and parliamentary coalitions that are crucial to building a new government. This vote's aftermath will set the tone for the coming years. Will the country usher in a new ruling class, or will the same political groups wield power in the war-torn nation? West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Iran is flexing its muscles in the region. First, it held war exercises on its border with Azerbaijan, and now it has warned Israel over its presence in the country. In our next report, we take a look at what is Iran's end game here.
This is Iran and Azerbaijan. The two share a 700-kilometer border. The countries have enjoyed cordial relations, but war games have now driven them apart, stoking flames of enmity in the region. It started last year with the Nagorno-Karabakh War. The 44-day war marked a significant victory for Baku. Armenia handed over much of the conflicted region to Azerbaijan. This changed everything between Baku and Tehran. Earlier, much of Iran's shared border was under Armenia's control. Now, this border area belonged to Azerbaijan. Frustrated by Iran's support to Armenia, Baku cracked down on smuggling near the border. Tensions were further stoked by joint military drills. The Azerbaijani army, along with Turkey and Pakistan, held drills just 500 kilometers away from the country's border with Iran. Escalating the dispute further, Iran conducted military exercises near the border. The West Asian nation went all out. There were tanks, howitzers and helicopters, all firing at targets on the ground. A multi-day exercise to flex its military muscles. Since then, there have just been tit-for-tat actions. The Azerbaijani government ordered the closure of a Baku mosque. Ironically, it was linked to Iran's supreme leader. Azerbaijan claimed that the move was necessary. It said that there has been an upsurge in COVID-19 cases. Iran, however, said it was not informed about the closure. Currently, there are two reasons why the countries are clashing. The first is Azerbaijan's growing regional clout. Baku is planning to establish the Zangezur border. This is an overland corridor across southern Armenia. It will link up the Nakhchivan enclave bordering Turkey. Iran fears that the deal will cut it off the region. The second is Azerbaijan's long relationship with Israel. Iran is concerned by Israeli presence in the Caucasus and says that it will not tolerate any geopolitical change. It is a warning it has sounded, not once, but twice.
We certainly will not tolerate geopolitical change and map change in the Caucasus, and we have serious concerns about the presence of terrorists and Zionists in the region.
While Iran and Armenia may not look like partners, the reality is that Tehran is pretty close to Yerevan. Iran needs Armenia as a crossing for transport, while Yerevan is sticking to Iran to stand up against its neighbor. Currently, there are many factors affecting Tehran-Baku relations. There is Tel Aviv and Washington, the Armenian community in Iran, as well as fears of Iranian influence in the Azeri society. For now, tensions are running high. With the diminishing US presence in West Asia, Iran is pushing for more and more influence. But Azerbaijan is also not backing down. It is strengthening its relationship with Turkey and Israel, a move that Iran views as an existential threat. How the conflict plays out in the coming days is something we will have to wait and watch out for. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
West Asia is no stranger to conflict, but the one that it is ignoring is climate change. Droughts have left farmers in Syria and Turkey struggling to save their produce, putting food security at risk in the region.
In Turkey, Hava Keles throws withered tomatoes in her basket. She stares inconsolably at the vines of rotten tomatoes. Keles is among thousands of farmers across Turkey whose livelihoods have been ravaged. Little rain has fallen to nourish their crops in the last 2 years, with climate change being blamed for the arid conditions. Environmental issues have never topped the political agenda here. But everything changed after a summer of extreme weather events, especially the forest fires on the Mediterranean coast. Coupled with devastating floods in the north, this action cannot come soon enough for indebted farmers, especially as droughts spread to more than half of the territory.
Let's put it this way. I calculated an average cost. I'm losing 35,000 to 40,000 lira a month on average from this work. I will continue as long as I can because I have these lands and I need to cultivate them. I need to manage some way or another, but I obviously have no idea how long I can resist.
Agriculture is a major sector of the Turkish economy, accounting for around 6% of GDP and employing 18% of the workforce. Turkey is self-sufficient in food production. It is the world's 7th largest agricultural producer, exporting everything from hazelnuts to tea, olives and figs. But the country's import of wheat has already risen exponentially. It went from $150 million to $2.3 billion in 2019. Such figures add to fears that Turkey could soon become dependent. It could move from producer to becoming a country reliant on exports to meet its own needs. Many accuse President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, whose popularity relies on urban growth and development. Citizens say that the Turkish leader failed to do enough when it comes to addressing pressing environmental issues. In Syria, the situation is similar. A dry year has left wheat farmers facing crop failure. Syria has been hit hard by low rainfall this year, especially in its breadbasket, Hasakeh province. Crop production has dropped by 95%. The lack of downpour, coupled with the high price of fuel, has made growing the rain-fed cereal impossible. Before the war erupted in 2011, Syria produced up to 4 million tons of wheat a year. This was enough to feed its entire population. But harvests have since plunged to record lows. This has increased the country's dependence on imports. The country produced 900,000 tons of grain this year, less than half of the 2 million tons needed.
This will affect the average citizen, the government, everyone. What will people eat? They have no resources. It will be very difficult if wheat is not planted. People will leave. I tell you, if it does not rain this year, drought will hit and people will leave. No one will be able to grow wheat.
For long, climate change has been sidelined in West Asia. It was rarely on the agenda and very little has been done to address it. Currently, the region is distracted, blind to the long-term threat of climate change. But ignoring it will not make the threat go away. With crucial resources running low, climate change will have to be higher up on the agenda. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
West Asia is not without its share of beauty, culture, and oddities. This is why in our new segment called Curiosities, we bring you heartwarming stories from the region. Let's take a look. That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. I'm Redi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.